What's up, guys? It's Reynad, and I'm here to finally bring you my Whispers of the Old Gods set review. Now, unlike a lot of other streamers, YouTubers, content providers, I like to wait until I know what the ban announcements are. I like to wait until all of the cards are revealed so we know what synergies exist, because I don't want to farm YouTube views over the course of 50 million freaking videos and give you subpar advice about what is and is not going to be good. I like to be fully informed before giving you that subpar advice. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump into it. I'm going to go through the less interesting cards a little bit faster because the last couple of times I've done these, it actually kills my voice. And it's just so much talking for like an hour straight. So anyway, let's jump right into it. I'm going to do neutrals first, then we're going to go class by class. And I'm going to ascend based on cost. So for neutrals, let's start off with Tentacle of N'Zoth. So 1 mana, 1/1, Death Rattle, deal damage to all minions. For standard, I think this kind of effect is a little bit too tough to get good value out of. There's just too many classes where they can hero power it and have it be just a little bit too weak and unimpactful that even in a Grim Patron deck, it might not quite be good enough to be one of the enablers that you use. But there's still a chance that it does see play. I think that in Wild, a card like this actually has a lot of potential because when I was playing a little bit earlier with Patron Warrior in the season, I was actually running Hobgoblin in Patron because it has synergy with, Armor Smith, Acolyte of Pain, Unstable Ghoul, Elven Archer, which is fantastic in that deck. So Tentacle of N'Zoth is a card that seems like it's just perfectly made for the Hobgoblin Patron deck, which sounds ridiculous, but synergies like that become more and more powerful in formats like Wild, and maybe Hobgoblin one day becomes like the version of Patron Warrior. So anyway, in that deck, which as of now is niche, this definitely makes the cut. Outside of that, in Standard, is this quite good enough? I don't think so. It's just not high impact enough at clearing the board like Explosive Sheep was, so probably won't see too much of it. Zealous Initiate. Death Rattle, give a random friendly minion +1/+1. I mean, I'm not one to discount 1 mana cards, especially neutrals. Maybe this is a card that Zoo decks desperately need, and we just end up playing it a lot more than we expected to. Cards like Argent Squire, for example, when Hearthstone first came out, did not look that powerful, but they ended up kind of defining a metagame. So is Zealous Initiate going to be one of those metagame-defining cards? Probably not, but it's also not unplayable. It's the kind of card that you're kind of encouraged to kill everything else before you kill the 1/1, and in a lot of cases that's going to be very awkward. So Zealous Initiate might be a card we see a lot of in Zoo, but most likely won't see it in too much else, and might not even see it in Zoo. We'll see. So Shifter Xerus, I was pretty scared that this card would be playable, but a little bit too slow to be good, but a very cool design. I love legendaries like this, very funny. I was thinking of what kind of deck would I put this in order to get good value out of it, and I thought that it would have to be a very slow deck. The card in Hearthstone that I would most compare Shifter Xerus to, or Xerus, I don't know how it's pronounced, is actually Bolvar 4-Dragon, because like Bolvar, Shifter Xerus gets more and more value the more turns he is in your hand. He doesn't get more stats or anything, but every single turn that he transforms, it's one more chance that you have the perfect minion for the situation. It's one more chance that you get Harrison Jones for their weapon, Black Knight for their taunt, Blood Knight for their divine shield, and it's not just tech cards. Maybe you get the perfect on-curve minion, and it's just fills in your curve that way. So basically you have to be in a deck that is very slow, plays the game for a lot of turns, and then is okay with having this card sit in hand for several turns. So all of those things combined, I'm pretty sure it's a pretty terrible card, and I'm trying to be pretty open-minded with new cards, but I'm pretty sure it's really bad. But you could still play it in Control Warrior because it is pretty cool, and it's just really fun legendary. Nat the Darkfisher, people are talking about this guy in mill decks and stuff. I don't even know if mill decks want their opponents to draw cards. I realize that that's the win condition, but you kind of want to make them draw all of those cards in one turn so that they don't get full value out of a lot of them. So the main weakness of mill decks, which to be clear is the only kind of deck I would really consider this kind of card. Even in mill decks, I don't think this quite makes the cut because it doesn't solve the main problem of stopping your opponent from killing you with burst damage. Although mill decks did get a buff with a Druid combo leaving the game. That's actually the biggest buff that could have happened to mill decks. But I still don't quite think it's going to be enough to make them great. And I'm not sure Nat will see play in those decks. I mean, maybe it will. It's okay. But I would just like to say how frustrated I am that there is not a just like a priest 2/4. Priest so desperately needs just a vanilla 2/4 minion. No dragon synergy, nothing like that. It just needs a damn 2-drop, and there just hasn't been one, like, ever. Maybe Blizzard tested it, and it was too good for priest. I don't know. Anyway, Beckoner of Evil. So, Cthulhu, right? Looking at the Cthulhu deck and archetype in general, a lot of the class cards are the most powerful Cthulhu-related cards, and those class cards are kind of going to decide what the best Cthulhu decks are. Is Beckoner of Evil good enough in those Cthulhu decks? Maybe. Maybe you only want to play the defensive Cthulhu cards, which I wouldn't classify this as one of the more defensive ones. And maybe this ends up not making the cut because there's so many options for Cthulhu cards. You don't need to play River Crocolisk to make him good. But maybe you do end up playing him just to fill in the curve early. It's not the worst card, but I would not be surprised, even though this is like the standard Cthulhu card, if this one ends up not quite making the cut in some of the slower Cthulhu decks, and they just want to play the higher value minions, and maybe cards like Wild Growth or Removal instead of Beckoner of Evil. But overall, not unplayable. I just don't think that the mid-rangey Cthulhu deck that just plays vanilla statted minions is going to do that well, probably. I think the Cthulhu deck would be more specialized as a control deck or a ramp deck. Moving on to Duskboar, Holy Power Creep. Yeah, I mean, it's cool that it exists. It's an interesting card. They're going to try every combination of stats at some point, and maybe this sees play, but probably not. You would have to be pretty ambitious to play this in a face deck, I assume. Really only weak to Mage, though, to be honest. Warlock could have Mortal Coil, but you're kind of okay with Rogue or Druid hitting this with their face, because then it kind of did its job. Traded for 2 mana, did 4 damage to them, it's fine. Probably not good enough to see play. Twisted Worgen, so very cool card, really big Worgen, obviously. It's the kind of card that might see play in the face decks, obviously. It's what it's most geared for, a lot like Worgen Infiltrator. It's a card that I think we'll see play in something like Face Hunter at some point, but you have to point out how vulnerable it is to Knife Juggler, which they decided to barely change, Flame Juggler, which is in the game, Bat Juggler, which is the new Premier 1-drop for Hunter, Swipe is still in the game. Like, it's still very vulnerable to, like, AoE, so I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see this card at all, but it's also the kind of card that is costed aggressively enough that there's a good chance it sees play in face decks. Moving on to Bilefin Hunter, Battlecry, summon a 1/1 ooze with Taunt. I don't think you would play this just like for its stats as a minion, like without the Murloc tag. Maybe in a bolster deck or something. Like, it's not terrible stats. You are getting 3/2, half of it has Taunt. That's a big deal. Overall, though, I don't think it's quite strong enough to make the cut. I think that Murloc Tide Hunter is probably already better. The one that makes 2 Murlocs. I think he's going to be better in a Murloc dedicated deck, because every Murloc has Taunt in a Murloc deck. So I don't think this is quite going to make the cut, but cool that they're experimenting with new ways to do early drops. Twilight Geomancer, Taunt, Battlecry, give your Cthulhu Taunt. So 2 mana Silverback Patriarch, haven't seen this before. This is a card that might actually see play as a 1-of tech card in very slow Cthulhu decks. We don't have Big Game Hunter in the game anymore. It might be the case that people aren't playing a lot of removal that can just deal with like a 20/20, and because of that, giving it Taunt is a very big deal. I wouldn't play 2 of it because you don't want to draw 2, you only want to draw 1, because if you draw the second one, the Battlecry is useless. But I do think playing 1 of this in like a ramp deck with Cthulhu is not unreasonable, so might actually see play. Squirming Tentacle, 3 mana, 2/4 Taunt, more power creep. Silverback Patriarch still has Beast Tag, I guess. I don't think it's good enough to make the cut. We already see cards like Fierce Monkey that aren't even good enough for some defensive warrior decks, so probably won't see too much of this guy. Spawn of Nazoth's Death Rattle, give your minions 1/1. This is pretty tough to get value out of, because most of the time the Death Rattle is going to be triggered by your opponent. If they're ever in a position where this Death Rattle is going to get a lot of value, then they're just going to deal with your spawn, I think, or rather your other minions around it, and make trades in a way that this card isn't as effective as it could be. So without being able to, I guess, give it charge or something, it's very unlikely that this sees play, even in a dedicated token deck. So moving on to Twilight Elder. Spider Tank worth of stats. Gives your Cthulhu +1/+1. This is what a real minion looks like. This minion, Spider Tank has great stats, but even this guy might be a little too vanilla to make the Cthulhu deck. I think he'll most likely see play because you want some good early game plays. This guy has pretty good stats. This is like the type of vanilla Cthulhu minion that I think might actually be played in most Cthulhu decks. So I definitely expect to see a good amount of this guy. He's definitely better than Beckoner, the 2-mana Cthulhu guy. And yeah, just solid all-around card, and I think this is a good design for Cthulhu decks. So we got Flipped Magma Rager, just as playable as the last one, just as much to talk about with it. Moving on to Slithid Swarmer, it's actually a very cool card. I like this a lot. A lot of people point to Rogue when they think about this card, and honestly, Rogue does need a 3-drop. Like a lot of games with Rogue, when you don't have something to deadly poison and kill, you're just playing like a naked SI agent on the board, and that always feels terrible because you want to get value out of all your cards. But Slithid Swarmer has insane stats. This is great. 3-mana 3/5 with your dagger that's going to be 4 damage. It's like a 3-mana Yeti. And Rogue really needed a 3-drop, so I actually think Slithid Swarmer might see a lot of play in that deck. But even outside of Rogue, the Face Warrior deck, good old Reynad special, is only getting better and better with every set release. And there's definitely some new tools for that deck in Whispers of the Old Gods. So this guy would definitely see play in a deck like that as well. Curves into Armani Weaponsmith, or the 4-mana 3/3 guy. So yeah, pretty cool. Disciple of Cthulhu. Not enough people talking about this guy. I'm not sure why this is in the game. Like, Argent Horse Rider is already pretty good and in a lot of stuff, and Disciple of Cthulhu is mostly better. He's not as good with like buffs and stuff, but he's just really solid. Like, gets around taunt, gets that immediate value when you're behind. Can get direct damage to kill somebody. It just has all of this upside with the Cthulhu text randomly that it doesn't need to be playable. It doesn't need the Cthulhu text, but it's there. I mean, it's just a good card, period. Unfortunately, it is one of those cards that's just like good, and in a lot of constructed decks, in Standard or Wild, you'd rather play very specialized cards with specialized roles that are either like a 1 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 when all the conditions are met, and you try to meet those conditions. This card's just kind of like all around solid. It doesn't really, get insane when you meet certain conditions. So, as good as it is, it might not see an insane amount of play, but I do think it is a very strong card, and it'll definitely be played in stuff. And I think a lot of stuff, most likely. So, moving on to Aberrant Berserker. So, they removed an attack from Chillwind Yeti, and the Enrage is +2 attack. So, the idea is the second thing that hits this is probably dying. Oh, that's actually kind of reasonable. I think this is better than Chillwind Yeti. That's saying a lot. Chillwind Yeti is a solid minion. The thing about having 5 health is it's usually not going to die to one thing. Usually you're going to have to run 2 things into it. So sometimes that Enrage ability will be ignored because you'll hit it with a big minion and then you'll trade in with another one that was going to trade anyway. But if you're trying to, hero power down this Aberrant Berserker after you've hit it with a 4-attack minion, it's going to hurt a lot more. And I think it's a pretty big deal. So probably not going to see any constructed play. Solid arena minion. Chillwind Yeti is just not quite good enough anymore. Polluted Hoarder. This was in the first set of reveals. I think it was actually the first card they showed from Whispers. I think it's pretty disappointing, to be honest. I mean, it's cool. I like the flavor. They're polluting old cards, but overall, the best card I can compare this to is like Gnomish Inventor. Some decks really, really want the 4-mana neutral draw effect, and if they're a little bit aggressive, maybe they'll prefer the attack on this guy to the health on Gnomish Inventor. But overall, just too slow to see play, and very, very unlikely to be played in anything. Cthulhu's Chosen, 4-mana 4/2 Divine Shield. So this card might be the card that we complain about moving forward, right? This is a card that a lot of people compare to Piloted Shredder, and for good reason. What deals with this? There's just like no good answer. It's just a solid neutral dude. You can play it in anything. You can play it in mid-range decks, control decks. Obviously, you'll play it in Cthulhu decks. You'll play it in aggro decks probably. Like, not having played with a minion like this before, I don't know how good it is. But if I compare it to Argent Commander, where I'm losing, two mana for the charge, that's a great deal. Like, this is just a minion that I expect will either see a good amount of play or potentially just dominate Standard the way that Shredder did, because quite frankly, I just don't know what deals with it well. It's just one of those minions you cannot deal with effectively. It just has to be good. So, I hate saying things as absolutes, but, if I were investing in Whispers of the Old Gods cards, Cthulhu's Chosen would be definitely up there. Very, very good card. Faceless Shambler, taunt, battle cry, copy of friendly minions' attack and health. First time I read this, I didn't notice the taunt, but they did nerf Ironbeak Owl, so there's less silence, which is obviously the kind of effect that Faceless Shambler is going to be most vulnerable to. But overall, it's I think just kind of a win more card. In order to get full value out of it, you really need to already have the board. You can use it with like Eerie Statue in a New Age handlock type of deck with, Sunfury Protectors and stuff. And maybe in a deck like that, it would be passable because we are losing a lot of tools like Sludge Belcher and all, and Healbot. But overall, I hate to write cards off. You know what I mean? Like Big Game Hunter being changed changes everything. It just changes everything. Like just playing a massive minion and then playing another massive minion might be a real strategy that's just really strong. So I'm not going to count it out, but I think it's unlikely that this sees play because the situations where it's at its best, you're already winning. So Eater of Secrets, I was actually casting the championship when they revealed this card. There needs to be some sort of anti-secret card in the metagame. There should be some kind of tool for people to, if they lose to a secret deck, they should have an option to, like, add to their deck and be like, oh, I want to punish this secret deck player, It's important that Hearthstone has that system of checks and balances with the tools that Blizzard gives us. And Eater of Secrets is, it's pretty bad. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The card just sucks. The risk, like you're losing so many stats in order to include it in your deck that it's just a very high risk, medium reward card. So overall, I expect this to never see play. It's not even good against Secret Paladin. Like if I knew my opponent was playing Secret Paladin, I probably wouldn't even put this card in my deck because they still attack first with the Challenger. You still die. So I don't know. It is what it is. I wish that the Secret Destroyer was a little bit better, but I'm also glad that it's not as swingy as Kazan Mystic, because my complaint about Kazan Mystic was it was unbeatable. If it ever hit the Secret, the Kazan player just won. It was like too swingy. So this is more toned down, maybe a little too toned down, but still, good spot. Good that it exists. Something was going to blow up Secrets. Might as well be this. Infested Tauren, overall, stats just aren't quite good enough. I'm just going to move on. Average arena minion, not going to see much play. Although, I don't want to make this too long, but we are losing a lot of minions that replace themselves on the board. Things like Haunted Creeper and Rubian Egg, Piloted Shredder. And that's a kind of effect. The Death Rattle that replaces you with other stuff on the board, it's just so naturally strong against AoE effects that it might be the kind of card that squeaks into a deck somehow, even though it looks terrible on paper. That is unlikely, though. Twilight Summoner, Death Rattle, summon a 5/5 Faceless Destroyer. So in the year 2016, in the near future, several months from now, every single board from every single opponent will have 7 Knife Jugglers, and Twilight Summoner in that world will, only have 1 turn of Summoning Sickness because he'll get juggled. In reality, there's only going to be 1 Knife Juggler. It's not going to hit this guy, and you're going to have to wait 2 turns to attack with the 5/5, on top of assuming all of that risk from playing a minion that can be silenced, which is an effect that's still in the game. It'll still be around. I think it's too slow, to be honest, and I can't really imagine a deck where this would be a good fit. So moving on to Evolved Kobold, 4 mana, spell damage plus 2, 2/2. Stats are just way too low. Guy won't see any play. Let's move on. Blackwater Pirate, your weapons cost 2 less. Cost reduction is actually one of the most dangerous effects to add to a card game, and they happen to do it on the one type of card that it's kind of safe to cost reduce, because weapons blow each other up. So there's no risk of 2 Blackwater Pirates coming down and then a million weapons getting played in one turn and doing anything, because you can still only attack once per turn. So a cool card. I don't think it'll see play because in order for this card to be good in your deck, you would have to play a lot of weapons in order to make sure you have one when you play this. But if you have a lot of weapons, you're still only attacking once a turn. You don't want to like draw them all together. So you don't want to cost reduce several weapons because they blow each other up. So overall, I don't think this will ever see play, but you know, it's cool that they did cost reduction on a card type that it's safe to do it on. Midnight Drake, Battlecry, gain 1 attack for each other card in your hand. This card's just terrible. 4 health is bad. The dragon tag is not enough to make this good. It's vulnerable to silence. It's just so bad. This card will never see play in anything. Midnight Drake's just very, very weak. Disenchant this guy. Cyclopean Horror, taunt Battlecry, gain 1 health for each enemy minion. So this kind of card you would want to put in a deck that could play like Mind Control tech. Maybe with like Frost Nova, it could be cute or something like that. But overall, you don't want to play cards that are only good when you're behind because it's just a bad recipe for a deck. You know, you don't want to be losing most of the time. Some people say control decks are always losing, but that's just not the case. If you fail to develop a threat on a turn against a control deck, they'll play something of their own and they'll flip the board. But if you do have a clear board, Cyclopean Horror is just just a 3 mana or 4 mana 3/3. It's just not that impressive. Sorry if there's any background noise, by the way, guys. Actually doing this from New York right now. That's why the production level is so good compared to normal. My buddy Jeff has a great studio set up here. Anyway, moving on to Psychotron, 5 mana, 3/4, taunt, divine shield. Overall, just not that good of a card, to be honest. I think it's just a little bit overpriced for a taunt effect. I think that divine shield at that stage of the game is going to be pretty easy to get rid of with like a hero power or AoE from a swipe or a small minion that happens to be around. So I don't think this card's really going to do its job that well. I don't really expect to see too much Psychotron anywhere. Cult Apothecary says Battlecry, for each enemy minion, restore 2 health to your hero. This might actually see play in Freeze Mage, right? Freeze Mage does want to play 1 heal bot sometimes. If you Frost Nova their board, Blizzard their board, all the Freeze Mage cards are still there, So Cult Apothecary comes down, gains you your 8 life or something. Maybe Frost Nova you can trade in later. It's not unplayable. It's not going to replace heal bot, all right? But in Freeze Mage specifically, it might be a card that we see as a 1 of, maybe a 2 of, maybe. So, but probably unplayable. Won't see too much play. Corrupted Healbot, Death Rattle, restore 8 health to the enemy hero. It has synergy with Akanai Soul Priest and the new Akanai Soul Priest spell. I don't think it's going to be enough to make a 5 mana 6/6 a good minion, quite frankly. It's not that much better than Pit Fighter, although Pit Fighter is underrated. I played that card in Priest before. It gets better now that we lose Sludge Belcher. But yeah, I don't think it's quite good enough to see play. Priest is going to need stronger plays than this to be competitive. Validated Doomsayer, I think, is a very bad card. It's a card that you can only play when you're ahead on board. If you play it when you're behind on board, your opponent just attacks into it and just kills it for free. So it's just not that strong. And even if it does go off, either you were in a position where you were going to win anyway if you played like Pit Fighter instead of this guy, or it's like you're in a position where having a 7/7, it's never going to make the difference, I think, basically. You're getting like +1/+1 extra stats over a standard minion, or +2/+1. It's just not worth the drawback of having this guy be unplayable when you're behind. So moving on to Darkspeaker, Battlecry swap stats with a friendly minion. Maybe this sees play in a wild deck that has like eggs and stuff, but overall, I feel like this card is, you're paying 5 mana to give +3/+6 to something. If you compare this to like a Veln's Chosen, it's just not worth like adding 2 mana to the cost for a slight buff like in stats that you're getting. It's just a very hard card to get value out of. I don't expect to see much play on this at all. I think it would have been more interesting as a 4/6, but making cards more interesting by making them stronger is pretty bad way of designing, so I can see why they were more conservative. But yeah, I don't expect Darkspeaker to see too much play. I recognize that it has synergy with some stuff, but it's not quite strong enough. Crazed Worshipper, taunt whenever this minion takes damage, give your Cthulhu +1/+1. I mean, Fen Creeper didn't see much play. I don't think this guy is going to either. I do think we're going to see an upsurge in Black Knight from the influx of Cthulhu ramp, but yeah, Crazed Worshipper, I don't think this quite makes the cut. I think he's going to be better 5 mana options in decks where you want those, even if you're playing a Cthulhu deck. Scarum Cultist. I mean, this card has worse stats than Boulder Fist Ogre, and just as a rule of thumb, I think that the Cthulhu Battle Cry bonus, it should kind of be a free roll on your minion. You know what I mean? My minion should at least be as good as Boulder Fist Ogre in order to have me play it in my Cthulhu deck, regardless of whether it buffs Cthulhu or not. So, you know, it has to be at least as good as Spider Tank if it's going to buff my Cthulhu. I can't lose stats to buff Cthulhu. This card does lose stats compared to Boulder Fist, so I don't think it'll see play. Corrupted Seer, it's actually kind of cool. I mean, it's a 6-mana neutral consecration, sort of, kind of. It's weird. I don't know. Would you play this in a Murloc deck? Maybe. Some Murloc decks just want to be very, like, YOLO. You know, you want to get on board, stay on board, burst them down, do a lot of damage quickly. But now we have new tools like the new 1-mana Paladin Murloc, Corrupted Seer. Maybe we'll see slower, more mid-rangey Murloc decks. I think it's the direction that Paladin might trend in, actually. So, you know, in those Murloc decks, yes, this will see play. But it's also interesting as just a new, like, neutral spell available for any class that is willing to pay 6 mana to deal 2 damage to everything. Maybe something like Freeze Mage wants to do this. Maybe some deck wants... Like, they're desperate enough for AoE that they want this effect. We'll see. But mostly you'll see playing Murloc decks. Scaled Nightmare, this card's pretty terrible. Excuse me. I realize that there's synergy with things like Cold Blood and all that, but overall, just not that strong of a card. For all the same reasons that Validated Doomsayer is bad. You're just going to play it, and if you're behind on board, either it's going to die for free, or you're going to die because it doesn't have Taunt. So... I just don't think it's that strong. It takes too many turns to get going. It's just too easy to play around for the opponent to mitigate its value. And, you know, maybe some guy gets the Cold Blood Stealth Dream, but you know what? I'll beat that guy the other 9 games that he plays it. So, yeah, I don't expect this to see much play. Mukla, Tyrant of the Veil. So as far as just, like, being a beast for a beast deck, I don't think that's the reason you're going to play this card. I don't think he's quite the best fit in beast decks. I think he is a great fit in decks like Flamewaker Mage, you know? Like, any deck that just wants more spells in its hand, this is a great tool. You're getting a reasonable body, you're getting 2 spells, those spells have immediate impact. Like, I think if anything, this will be a card for Flamewaker decks, and not so much a card for beast decks. But it's interesting, it's solid, we'll see if, like, it's not unplayable. It might be the kind of legendary, like Karen Bloodhoof, that's like, you know, solid and good, but not quite good enough to see play in most decks. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see him a lot. But I think it'll be mostly for decks that want to add spells to their hand. Ancient Harbinger. It's just, again, right? Like it's a Cthulhu synergy card, or you know, an Old God legendary, or an Old God synergy card. But you're losing stats. If I'm getting a 4/6, it should cost no more than 5 mana. This card does not pass that test. Takes a full turn to get going. It's not even guaranteed to get value, so I expect Ancient Harbinger to not see play ever, even in combo decks that desperately want to find some 10-mana card. I would rather just play Card Draw instead of this guy, because if I just play like Loot Hoarders, I'm just as likely to draw that 10-mana guy by turn 10 anyway. Nerubian Prophet, start of your turn, reduce this card's cost by 1. This card's just weird, to be honest. If it's in your opening hand, you can play it turn 3, right? But how often do you want to keep a 3-drop anyway? A lot of times you'll only keep 1-mana, 2-mana cards. And if you top deck this guy later, he's super crappy. So I think Nerubian Prophet is unlikely to see play. I think they costed him perfectly so that he's not oppressive. It is a dangerous ability to have in a card. But again, it's this kind of like Bolvar 4-Dragon effect. And like Shapeshifter Xeris too, where it just needs to be in your hand for too long to be good, and because of those situations where you top deck it late and it's just a dead card, that's the reason it's going to be not played too often. So Hogger gives us Grim Patron number 3. I love this card. I think it's very cool. A lot of people didn't like this card when they first saw it. I think it's actually kind of awesome. I think Patron Warrior looks like it'll still be a thing in some capacity, and it seems like a great fit for it. It'll be fun to play with. Might even play it in Wild and Patron, just to have like another win condition. You know, it's just a cool card. I like it. I like that it has synergy depending on how you build your deck. It's just solid on its own, tough to get rid of. Helps you not die to stuff. I like this Hogger. I'm excited to play with it. I think it's reasonable. mostly in Patron Warrior. Grotesque Dragonhawk, pretty terrible. Moving on. Bog Creeper, same thing. Big 7 mana 6/8. Kind of interesting for Arena, I suppose. A little bit like Captured Jormungandr. Yeah, he'll be solid in Arena. Not good in Constructed, though. Twin Emperor Veclor. This card's nuts. This is the kind of card that makes Cthulhu decks good. Screw Cthulhu. 2 4/6 taunts for 7 mana is nutty. Like, this is the reason to build a Cthulhu deck. If you do this on curve, you're just going to win most of the time. Based on the class cards that I've seen that interact with the old gods, it looks like Cthulhu Druid is going to be the best candidate for a good Cthulhu deck. But, yeah, anyway, very good card, very solid. Any Cthulhu deck that pops up, I expect this guy to play a major role in it. Very awesome card. I'm excited to play with him. If you want to play Cthulhu, craft this guy if you can. Eldritch Horror. I don't know. It's a lot of stats. 29 for sure. Not good enough. It's just big and vanilla and stupid. It's got a big ass, but it's not quite good enough for Hearthstone. Doomcaller, Battlecry, give your Cthulhu +2/+2. If it's dead, shuffle it in your deck. I cannot possibly imagine a scenario where you need to Cthulhu somebody twice to win a game. Maybe against some ridiculous Elise, Justicar Trueheart, Control Warrior. That's a thing you'll want to do, but realistically, don't play this. Too slow. You don't need this. Play an anti-aggro card so that you have time to do stuff. Boogie Monster, the new worst legendary in the game. For the love of God, dust him. He's just terrible in so many ways. Moving on. Blood of the Ancient One. When I first saw this card spoiled, I actually saw the Ancient One first, which is the creature it spawns, which is a 9 mana 30/30. And I thought the Ancient One was its own card. And even that card I thought was terrible. So, Blood of the Ancient One. So I take one terrible card. I have to draw my second copy of the terrible card. So I only have 28 good cards in my deck to begin with. I have to play both of them. Both of them have to be alive. And then I get a third terrible card. This is just, look, it's cool. I like the thought, but I think the Ancient One would have been interesting if it was just its own thing. Even then, I don't think it would have been good enough, but it would have been interesting. But yeah, Blood of the Ancient One is not good enough. I guess with Emperor Thorson in charge, maybe Ancient One would be broken on its own. But yeah, anyway, Blood of the Ancient One, won't see play. It's cute, though. Sogoth the Slitherer. I was browsing all of the fantastic deals on apparel and learning all about the Hearthstone metagame to help myself become legendary over at TempleStorm.com when I saw that they spoiled this card. And it's pretty interesting. There's been a lot of discussion, actually, in the community about whether this card's really underrated, whether it'll end up seeing a lot of play. They did nerf Ironbeak Owl, but I mean, in a heavy taunt deck, this card might see a reasonable amount of play. It doesn't compete with the turn you want to play Cthulhu. It leads into it perfectly, actually. So in Cthulhu Druid, this might be an excellent card to play. The thing about Black Knight is, if a taunt-heavy deck is popular in the metagame, you're going to see Black Knight, and the best counter to it is just more taunts. Like, back in the old days of Black Knight in every tournament, what we would do is play Sunwalker in our Druid decks, just so that Ancient of War doesn't get Black Knighted. Like, you would play Sunwalker, and they would Black Knight it, and it would suck, but that's all according to plan, because then you play Ancient of War, and now, you beat their Black Knight on board. So that's kind of what Sogoth might do, Maybe they Black Knight your Ancient of War, or your 5/7 taunt guy, but then you play Sogoth, and then what do they do, So, honestly, this card's pretty reasonable, and it's just going to depend on the metagame. Like, some metagames he'll be just like too slow, but some metagames he'll be nuts and just feel like unfair to play against. So overall, solid card. He will see play at times, but he's going to go in and out of the metagame, I think, kind of like Harrison Jones. Or either that, or he'll just be like really good and in every deck. So, but yeah, definitely solid guy. Faceless Behemoth. Yeah. Moving on to N'Zoth the Corruptor. So, Battlecry, summon all your Death Rattle minions that died this game. It's an interesting card. I mean, we lose most of the good Death Rattles with Naxxramas, but we do gain a bunch of new ones that are great. Is this card good enough for Constructed? I tend to think that 10-mana cards aren't. I think in Wild, I think Dr. Boom will be too slow. So, that kind of gives you an idea of how good I think, a 10-mana 5/7 is going to be. So, basically, I don't really expect this guy to see any play. I think he is too slow, but very cool. Honestly, the old gods are awesome. There's big epic minions. This effect doesn't quite do it for me. I think it's just a little bit too slow. But maybe there's some control deck wants to use this guy as a finisher. This is like maybe the most playable one outside of Cthulhu, because in theory, if you set up a bunch of defensive minions like Sludge Belcher, maybe like the new taunt guy with Death Rattle that summons a slime for 4 mana, you know what I mean? Maybe you just play a deck that's like all those guys, right? And they all of them help you live, and then as soon as you play this guy, they all come back, and you can't get killed because everything has taunt. Because that's kind of a lot of the risk in playing a 10-mana guy. You play a 10-mana guy and you just die to burst damage. But yeah, in the case of playing a deck with lots of taunts, maybe that could be this could be its own like control finisher. It could see play in that way. I'm not sure. I'm not going to write it off completely, but it looks pretty underwhelming to me as is. Cthulhu himself. So I love this effect. I love that the Hearthstone development team is doing new things with card games that only Hearthstone can do. And, changing the stats of cards in your deck and stuff. It's very cool. I love the design. It's a really big knife juggler, but it doesn't matter that much because if you go back to watch my video on RNG that I just made before this, you'll understand why I'm okay with turn 10 RNG. Also, this guy's going to shoot so many missiles and, identifies an attack helicopter that he's going to like kill all of your opponent's board, and then whatever's left over is going to go to the face. So it'll be like the same outcome almost every time. Very cool card. I'm excited to look forward to playing it. What classes is he going to be good in? We'll get to that later in the set review as I go through the class cards one by one. You charge the Ragebound. At the end of your turn, put a minion from your deck onto the battlefield. It's the kind of card that new players love. It's a stupid big minion that brings more stupid big minions into play. It's cool. I love seeing legendaries like this that new players can have fun with. I don't think it's competitively viable. Maybe there's a way you can cheat it into play with like Ancestor's Call or something like that. But mostly unplayable, but cool. Like it's just a nice big finisher that new players will get excited about, and I think that's good for the game. Yogg-Saron Hope's End. So, yeah, I just have my fingers crossed that this card sees no competitive play, because if this is like, if the Yogg-Saron deck is a thing in tournaments, imagine like every third game in competitive play comes down to this coin flip on turn 10. The RNG happens pretty late. It's very possible to make the game end before then, but if all the pieces fall into place and you build this removal heavy like rogue deck and you have healing and you can always play this 10-mana guy as like Hail Mary, that could get pretty dangerous because it's very volatile. But all in all, very cool card. I know I'm going to lose to it literally every single time it's played against me. I'm just going to hope that that's not very often. But yeah, cool card. As far as constructed viability, probably not going to see too much is my guess. I hope that they would test this kind of card and make sure that it does not see competitive play. But, if I get really upset at Hearthstone, which usually doesn't take too long, I might fall back on Yogg-Saron and try to, just Yogg some people, ruin their day. Seems like it'd be pretty fun. Moving on to Deathwing Dragon Lord. So, big flashy dragon. People get so excited about this card. Blizzard has once and for all proven who their favorite kid is, because this is the kind of reveal everyone wants. As far as constructed playability, it's completely terrible. Not going to lie. It's just like too slow, to be fair. But it's such a cool card, right? Like, it's a big flashy dragon. The artwork's awesome. Deathwing is so iconic. I mean, I think big legendaries like this are doing it right, They feel epic even if they're not constructed viable. I think that's good. So for a long time, I felt like that's how Ragnaros should have been designed, for example, because I felt like when he was the only RNG card in competitive play, he was deciding games too much. But anyway, Deathwing, cool card. Won't see constructed play, but glad it exists. Forbidden Healing says, spend all your mana, heal for double the mana you spent. This actually has the potential to close out some games on its own. We're losing Antique Healbot, and that's a bigger deal than it seems like. So we're kind of going to be strapped for good healing, and Forbidden Healing is the kind of card that just ends the game against Face Hunter on its own. It might be an interesting one-of tech card in a lot more defensive, controlling Paladin decks, and Blizzard definitely gave us some tools to make those kinds of decks happen. So This is a powerful card. All the forbidden cards are much better than they look, I think. And there might be a weird world where we play 2 of each of these cards, but to be honest, they're really hard to evaluate until I play with them. So overall, I think it's strong. It also, you have to keep in mind, it's just like wins Fatigue Wars for you on its own too. It's a card I would play at least 1 of in Control Paladin, maybe 2. Maybe it's that good. I don't know. It feels a lot like Frost Nova that you can play whenever you can play it. So definitely interesting card. Anyway, moving on. Vilefin Inquisitor. This is the kind of card you have to make Murlocs a thing. A 1-drop with reasonable stats that's going to live, get buffed by the other Murlocs. It's going to give you longevity against AoE. Works like that. Hero power is so strong for a Murloc deck. I'm glad they designed a card like this. It's a really good design. This is what they need to do to make Murloc decks viable, because you can't play, Murloc Raider and expect to win games. You can't play 1-mana 2/1s unless they deal 2 damage to your opponent's face, in which case you can play them in every deck. But yeah, anyway, Vilefin Inquisitor, I like this card. It'll see play. Is it enough to make the Paladin Murloc deck good? Maybe. It's got some other tools in this set too. It'll definitely be fun to try out. Looking forward to it. Divine Strength. So this card looks really underwhelming. A lot of people are, not really thinking it's any good. But believe it or not, cards like this are the kinds of cards that might be really good in Wild because they cost 1 mana. And in Wild, it's going to be a lot more important to do the most that you can in the early game with the mana that you have compared to just doing like the biggest, flashiest thing in the late game, which is going to be more of Standards thing, I think. Anyway, Divine Strength, very fast. You're getting good stats on your minion. There's going to be a Fiora, Light Bane, and Dark Bane deck. I remember when I did my set review of the Grand Tournament, I spoke highly of the sisters that, gain buffs. And all the cards that I get ridiculed a lot for that, for like my top 10 list. But that's because people are illiterate and they didn't read the things that I said about those cards. I said that as more and more sets come out, like the reason they were top of my list is because as more and more sets come out, those are the cards that are going to become really, really strong. So if we get a few more things like Divine Strength, all of a sudden, Fiora and Adis become just absurdly dominant in Wild. And I'm looking forward to seeing if this card's good enough for that kind of deck. Selfless Hero, Death Rattle, give a random friendly minion Divine Shield. So this give a random friendly minion Death Rattle thing, it's kind of like Dark Cultist. Dark Cultist is a very awkward card to play sometimes. In Dark Cultist's case, it has great stats on its own. It's hard to kill, but you also feel like a little bit cheated when you don't get the full value out of it. And this kind of Death Rattle is a harder type of Death Rattle to get value out of than it looks. With that said, 1-mana cards are freaking nuts, and this does stuff. So I am very confident that this card will see a lot of play. If not in Standard, then it'll see a lot of play in Wild. It's a 1-drop that does stuff that affects the board. It's great. Like, it will see play. But yeah, it is an ability. It's a little bit more awkward than it looks. I'm excited to see more Divine Shield synergy, though. I think it's really cool. A Light in the Darkness, discover a minion, give it 1/1. I don't think it's quite good enough. It's kind of like a backwards Mark of Nature that doesn't give you the minion you want and doesn't give you the full buff. I think this card's just pretty underpowered, but, it is what it is. I like that Discover's being introduced in more sets. That makes me happy. I like that mechanic. Rallying Blade, Battlecry, give 1/1 to your minions of Divine Shield. So this is kind of like the payoff to being the Divine Shield deck, right? And it's unfortunate that when you play this card on curve on turn 3, you're not getting the Battlecry value most of the time. But as a 3-mana 3/2, it's still pretty damn good because it curves perfectly into Keeper of Uldaman. Although if you play Keeper of Uldaman on curve, you're not really going to... It's not like they're going to have an 8/8 on turn 3 that you're going to shrink and attack, I guess. So, I don't know. It's very much like a late game weapon. It's not something you really want to play turn 3 because you want to get full value out of it. Is this enough to make the Divine Shield Paladin deck good? I don't know, but it's playable. Like, the numbers make sense to me. So, I would expect to see this somewhere, although this might go the way of, like, the Lance or something, where it just kind of falls to the wayside. We don't see too much of it. But all in all, I think it's playable. I think it's reasonable stats. So, Steward of Darkshire, this is a card I think will be fantastic in Wild because of Haunted Creeper and any future cards that they make like Haunted Creeper. I think it's just insane when you can play this on curve. It just wins the game. With that said, though, in Constructed, it's still pretty solid, I think. In a lot of decks, it can make life awkward. It's just you have to think of it as like a 5-drop or a 4-drop or like a 6-drop sometimes. It's not a minion that you want to play on curve, because if you play this turn 3 expecting it to live, you're going to be disappointed, right? Your opponent's just going to kill it every time. It's not going to get value, and you're just going to wonder, why is this not just like Spider Tank or, Twilight Elder or whatever? So all in all, it's a card that's more awkward to get value out of than it looks like in Standard, but it's also a card that can take over the game on its own at a very cheap cost. So wouldn't be too surprised to see a lot more of it moving forward. So moving on to Stand Against Darkness, summon 5 1/1 Silverhand Recruits. People are kind of underwhelmed by this card, but summoning a bunch of minions is just pretty damn strong. You're going to be hero powering before this point. You're going to be playing other stuff. Maybe your opponent plays their swipe before turn 5, and then you play Stand Against Darkness all of a sudden. And it's not just a 5-mana 5/5, right? Like, you get so much synergy out of having a lot of minions in play. Maybe you have Cult Master. Maybe you have Steward of Darkshire. Maybe you do like some sort of raid leader type of effect, or Direwolf Alpha. There's a lot of ways to take advantage of having a lot of bodies on the table. So Standing Against Darkness is more playable than it looks, but I still don't think it's quite good enough to see Constructed play. It's just a little too underpowered. Moving on to Ragnaros the Light Lord. This is actually one of my favorite cards in the set. I love this card. In Hearthstone, because of the consistent mana that you have relative to other card games, the big expensive minions in Hearthstone have generally been a lot weaker than the big expensive minions in a game like Magic. In Magic, if you pay 8 mana for a card, it draws you your entire deck and puts it in your hand. Like, it's disgusting what expensive minions can do in Magic. They just win the game on their own. Whereas in Hearthstone, you get to the 10 mana more consistently, so they have to kind of tone down the power level of late game minions. But in Ragnaros, they didn't. This guy is just worth 8 mana. He's just damn good. And on top of that, he's not good in aggro decks. If I'm playing a Mysterious Challenger deck, maybe I play this anyway. I don't know what that deck does. But, I probably won't, right? I probably would rather play Fiery Ragnaros. So, all in all, really cool card. I love that this is a card that's costed in a way that makes sense for an 8-mana card, to where it can see constructed play, so it's like in the conversation. And B, I like that it's a dedicated control deck finisher. And it's good healing, which like a lot of classes will be lacking. So all in all, love this card. Really fun to play with. I love to just have like a nice solid finisher for control decks for once. And I think this guy is going to be really, really good. And this is the kind of thing that Paladin needed to make Control Paladin a thing. So moving on to a Hunter. Well, actually, I guess I should talk about Cthulhu for every deck a little bit. We didn't really see like Cthulhu-related stuff for Paladin, so I'm just going to assume this is not the class you want a Cthulhu in. Anyway, moving on to Hunter. I'm going to start with Fiery Bat. I talked about this card in my video that I just posted about RNG in Hearthstone and randomness and what its role should be. And highly recommend you guys watch that video because it's actually like a good one. I put effort into it. Fiery Bat, I hate the design on this card. It's just 1-mana Knife Juggler. I just don't want to deal with this anymore. It's really frustrating me that this kind of design still happens because I think it's just lazy. I think they can do RNG like Clockwork Gnome in the early game, and that's like a lot healthier. But this kind of RNG that affects the board is just really bad. Is the card good? Yes, absolutely. It'll see play in aggressive Hunter decks. It'll see play in Beast Hunter decks. It's just a solid card. But I really wish it was not in the game because this kind of RNG that happens earlier in the game and affects the board, I think is really unhealthy. And I'm not looking forward to Hunter Juggler, defining Hearthstone tournaments moving forward. Anyway, on the Hunt, basically Elven Archer in spell form, so affected by spell damage, and it's a beast. Very cool. Back when I first picked up Gara for Tempo Storm, actually, he was playing double Elven Archer in his Hunter deck. He was free to play on like 3 accounts. All of them were top 5 legend on Europe or something. And he was just playing Hunter with Elven Archer. And he would play it turn 1 against Druid, aim it at the face, pass the turn. So the point is, Elven Archer has its place in Hunter. It's not as bad of a card as people think it is. Is On the Hunt going to be good enough to see play? Like, probably not, but it's not unplayable. This card's fine. It's got like some Stone Tusk boar type of thing going on too, where you deal the damage with the boar, but you don't lose the boar. Not quite as good with Houndmaster. All in all, we'll see if it's good enough, but probably not, but better than Elven Archer, so not unplayable. Infest, I don't really like. It's just too slow, honestly. You have to already be winning, have a bunch of crap on board, and then you play Infest, and then you wait for your crap to die if your opponent isn't like ignoring minions and trying to kill you. And then you hope that the minions you get off of it were good. Infest, I think just too slow. Not going to see too much play. Moving on. Forlorn Stalker, Battlecry, give all Death Rattle minions in your hand +1/+1. Maybe this is the kind of card that sees some play in Wild. But as far as Standard goes, it's going to be unlikely that there's enough playable Death Rattle minions in your hand to make this guy worth playing. Because, the cheap ones like Fiery Bat and stuff, you're going to play them before you play Stalker. So your hand's going to have very few Death Rattle minions that cost 2 or less, almost ever. So in Wild, maybe this will be good enough, and it can be like a 3-mana Mistcaller. But as far as constructed or Standard, I don't expect to see this card too much. Carrion Grub, I love this card. 2/5 Beast. Hunter needed just a dude to play. I like that this card is always Carrion Grub and not Huffer, only when I don't need it to be. So, great for like a slower Hunter deck. It's trying to build up the board, just a solid body. People are writing it off as unplayable, but this card fills an important role that nothing other than Animal Companion fills, and it fills it even better when it comes to Houndmaster, so we'll see if it's good enough. It might be. Hunter hero power is nuts. Infested Wolf also. This is the thing. Clearly it's worse than Shredder, but we're losing a lot of minions that replace themselves on the board, and I feel like people are forgetting how powerful that effect is. At DreamHack Summer 2014, I think it was, I would argue that Harvest Golem was the defining card of that format. And we had double combo Druid, we had Miracle Rogue, we had Freeze Mage, but I think Harvest Golem defined that format because no deck had a good answer except Hunter, which had Freezing Trap. And just having the board always because you play a minion that sticks around is so powerful. So anyway, point is, Infested Wolf might see a lot of play because we're losing all these Death Rattle minions like Haunted Creeper and Nerubian Egg, and people just kind of, we've been so desensitized, I guess is the word, to having these minions that replace themselves in the game for so long that people are kind of forgetting how sick this effect is. And when we lose all those minions, and Hunter is one of the only classes that gets a Shredder, even though it's a bad Shredder, people are going to be very frustrated that their Houndmasters are always live and things like that. So, yeah, I think Infested Wolf is much better than it looks, and I expect to see a good amount of it in Beast Hunter if that's a thing. Princess Hukaran, I don't think this is that good. If I have a high man in play and I'm attacking with it and I'm playing a 5-drop on top of that, I've already won the game. I don't need to do this Battle Cry. I think it's useless. I'd rather play a card like Stranglethorn Tiger that can steal the game when I'm behind. So I don't expect Princess to see much play at all. It's a card people are excited about, but this is like the Trogs are the set to me. I just don't really see it. I'm pretty confident in saying this card won't see much play. Giant Sandworm. We did lose Big Game Hunter. Cards like Hunter's Mark are more expensive. It's harder to kill big minions. Does that make this good enough? Probably not still. It does kill your entire board if it attacks most of the time, but it usually trades itself off in the process. And it's just so damn slow. Like, I think if your opponent does have the answer, like they freeze it or they have a sap or just like something, it doesn't have to be Big Game Hunter, then you're just going to lose the game because you played Ironbark Protector without taunt. So overall, I think it's too slow, but it's an interesting effect. I wish it was on a cheaper minion. Call of the Wild's pretty sick. Good value, immediate impact. 8 mana spell. Hunter didn't really have anything besides Ragnaros going on turn 8. So, great card. I expect to see a lot of this being played, and I'm glad to see some late game cards being introduced to Hearthstone that don't suck. So there'll be more variety than just Dr. Boom and Ragnaros. I like this card. All right, moving on to Mage. As for Cthulhu, again, I'm not really seeing Cthulhu stuff in Hunter. I don't think this is the class you're going to want to Cthulhu in, because in Hunter, you want to take advantage of your hero power. You're basically always overloaded in the late game if you're using your class the optimal way. Moving on to Mage. Forbidden Flame. Spend all your mana, deal that much damage to a minion. The Forbidden cards, grossly underrated. People, when evaluating cards, they do this thing where all the niche cards that suck most of the time, they think are great because they picture the best case scenario when in reality, like on average, the card sucks. And then a card like this, which always on paper looks mediocre but gives you so much flexibility. These kinds of cards are way better than people think. This card might be really, really sick, to be honest, moving forward. And just a solid removal spell. This is the kind of card where, like, I don't want to say it's, like, insane and it's going to be in every deck, because then I'll look stupid if it's not. I don't want to talk in absolutes. But it's also the kind of card where if I do see it in every Mage deck, and it's kind of like the breakout, role-playing card that kills dudes effectively, it wouldn't surprise me. Like, if it's just a 2 of standard Mage decks. Like, this could be as common as Frostbolt, for all we know. It's not as good as Frostbolt, but this card's stronger than people give it credit for, and would not be surprised to see it see a lot of play. Cult Sorcerer, spell damage +1. After you cast a spell, give your Cthulhu +1/+1. If I'm playing a Cthulhu deck, I don't want to be playing a bunch of cheap spells, which is what this guy kind of rewards you for doing. I don't think Cult Sorcerer is going to see a lot of play. The 1 extra attack doesn't really help the survivability, which is what you want on a spell damage minion. So relative to Kobold Geomancer, it's a lot better, but it's not like that much better. It's not enough better that it'll see constructed play, I think. Shatter, I'm not sure why this doesn't cost 1 mana. Compared to Ice Lance, it doesn't go to the face, but it deals a little extra damage to the minion, basically. But yeah, 2 mana, just too weak, even with the new ways to freeze that we have been given. So don't expect to see too much Shatter. Moving on to Twilight Flamecaller. You'll 1 damage to all enemy minions. So Arcane Explosion, very underrated card. I like it. Very effective. Things like Malagos. You can do a lot of cool things with Arcane Explosion that it's just a card people forget about. Twilight Flamecaller is not Arcane Explosion. No spell synergy. No spell damage synergy. Like, it's just too weak. It's a tech card, but one that I just have a hard time imagining a metagame where I would main deck this. Like, there would have to be so many token decks. So I don't expect to see much Flamecaller at all. Moving on to Demented Frostcaller. Actually, maybe I'm underselling that. Twilight Flamecaller, maybe that is stronger than I think it is. That could help you trade up into stuff. That card's at least good in Arena. It's actually kind of interesting. You'd have to have your own dudes for it to be optimal. I'm not going to write it off completely, but I don't think it's that good, the Flamecaller. Anyway, Demented Frostcaller. I actually like this card. Everyone was shit-talking it on Reddit and stuff when they spoiled it. I actually think this card's pretty good. Like, it's great with Water Elemental. It's so, like, a lot of people were saying, why would I play this over Water Elemental? It's like, okay, man. Like, they're meant to be played together, and you can have 30 cards in a deck. So, yeah, like... Anyway, Water Elemental, fantastic. You play it turn 4, you hit them in the face. Yeah, they're frozen. Frostcaller, even though it doesn't say it on the card, for those of you guys who don't know, only freezes unfrozen minions. So he actually locks your opponent out of the game if it lives. So imagine they have a hand that's just heavy on minions and they don't have a spell that can deal 4 damage. Or maybe their only way of killing a 4 health minion was a weapon, and now they're frozen and they can't. All of a sudden, your Frostcaller, you're playing 1 spell, 2 spells a turn, Water Elementals hitting them, you've locked them out of the game. Because if they can't kill your Frostcaller the first turn, they'll never kill it. You just lock them out of the game. So it might be an interesting 1 of to put in a Tempo Mage deck, maybe a 2 of. We'll see. It's certainly better against some classes than others, but I think this card is underrated, and it's the kind of card that can take over a game because of the caveat that it freezes unfrozen minions. But yeah, moving on. So Kabbalist's Tome. Blizzard gave me this card, which I'm grateful for. I love to do card reveals. I don't think it's the most exciting card. It's interesting. It might see play in Reno Mage or fatigue-oriented Mage decks, but based on what I'm seeing in this set right now, we didn't really get too many more tools for a fatigue type of strategy. Maybe Kabbalist's Tome is enough. I don't know. We are losing duplicates, so... Anyway, I think drawing cards this way is a little bit too low. If you want to get card advantage, you usually want to attach it to a minion so you're not also losing tempo. It's like Fire Elemental or Blackwing Corruptor. It is a 2-for-1, but it's also catches you up on tempo, which is why those cards are so good. This card, you're eating, you're doing nothing for 5 mana in exchange for 3 random spells, which, granted, those spells are going to catch you up in the game. This card will have some crazy things happen, or you get another Kabbalist's Tome, but overall... I think not going to see too much play. Servant of Yogg-Saron. I hate the design on this card only because I'm worried that it will actually see play. I wish that this could just get any spell regardless of cost, and it cost 9 mana and was really big. because then it would be not good enough to see constructed play. But this card worries me. There's way more positive outcomes than negative outcomes. And I just really hope that it doesn't see play too much. So I don't like the design. Is it good? I don't know. You really have to run the numbers. Trump had a spreadsheet and stuff. Overall, it's like probably not good enough, but if it is good enough, I'm very upset with Blizzard. Moving on, Faceless Summoner. I love this card. A lot of people are complaining because it's like Shredder RNG or whatever, but honestly, it's not that big of a difference. The spread on 3-drops, they all have reasonable stats. Most of the time, it's not going to matter. Sometimes they'll get like Injured Blade Master or King Mukla, and it'll look really good, and it is. But this RNG is happening at least on turn 6. So this randomness is happening so late in the game that you're going to have more mana to deal with whatever comes out. You've already gotten to play some Hearthstone in the meantime. This RNG isn't just going to decide the game on turn 2. So I think this is a healthy type of RNG, and mostly I'm excited because it's basically Boulder Fist Ogre, but it's one that we're going to see played. You're just paying for a pile of stats for 6 mana, and this one's good enough to see play. So I'm excited to see how that affects Standard. Anomalous is an interesting card. Sometimes you just really want another AoE spell, you know? Fatigue Mage already played double Blizzard, double Flame Strike, double Nova, double Kona Cold sometimes. Maybe you play this guy too as another finisher. It is a Lightning Rod for silence if he's the only target in your deck, and he's really hard to have him do what you want him to do when you want him to do it, but maybe in Fatigue Mage you'll want this effect. Probably won't see too much play though. Moving on to Priest. Forbidden Shaping. There's actually a Druid card that's very similar to this. When I first saw Forbidden Shaping, I basically remembered this thought process that I had a long time ago, or like a thought exercise where I wondered if there was a card that had a variable casting cost, and it was like a 3-mana 3/3 or a 4-mana 4/4 or a 5-mana 5/5, would that card be good? And because my chat asked me that, it was a donation I got once on stream, and my response was, I think that card would be broken. I think that card would be too good. Because even though all of those minions individually look bad on paper, the flexibility to fill in your curve and just end the game late game, the flexibility is worth so much. So I thought that card would be too good. And this card's very similar to that, but worse. Because if you're getting a Battlecry minion like Gnomish Inventor, Novice Engineer, something with a Battlecry, you're usually losing stats. So, on turn 2, you're getting a crappy 2-drop way too often. Overall, still good enough to see play. Still a lot of flexibility with this. It's going to be good against control, good against aggro. This card is way better than people think it is. Way better than people think it is. And I expect this to see a lot of play. Please, for the love of God, Blizzard, print a damn 2-drop. Like, that's a real 2-drop. I'm so upset. This is like the 5th set in a row without a 2-drop. A Wormrust Agent doesn't count. It's a dragon card. Anyway, Embrace the Shadow. This turn, your healing effects deal damage instead. This is the kind of card that does broken things in Wild once they make some card in the game that just has some degenerate 2-card combo that kills people. But as of right now, it's I don't know if it's worth like 2-for-1ing yourself to clear the board like that. You know what I mean? Maybe it is. A lot of the most powerful things that Priest can do involves Akanai Soul Priest. And maybe by having 2 of these in your deck, or 1 of these, you're more comfortable playing Akanai on curve as a 4-drop. So that alone definitely opens up some doors. So there's a card that might end up seeing a lot of play, in the future builds of Priest. But it's also a card that might see no play at all because it's just not worth 2-for-1ing yourself. Spending another heal spell just to kill a minion. I can totally understand why that wouldn't be too strong. But, now every single heal effect they print for Priest, that much more dangerous. And with Corrupted Healbot, maybe that's enough to make that card good. I don't know. Anyway, moving on. Hooded Acolyte, Water Elemental stats. It's got some text. Who cares? This is a good 4-drop. We don't have Shredder anymore. Holy Champion was just not quite durable enough. Priest just wants stuff to stick on the board, and it's so hard when you're always behind on turn 4 because Blizzard hates your 2-mana slot. So... Hooded Acolyte, I'm glad it exists. Good stats, good at fighting, great with Priest hero power. Not just because of the Cthulhu text, but just because it has a lot of ass, you can heal it. So, good card. I expect this to see play. And the Cthulhu text is relevant if you go the Cthulhu route. Maybe that's the finisher you want for Priest now, I don't know. Shadow Word Horror, I think this is worse than like Pyromancer, Holy Nova, just the Circle, Akanai, Shadow Word Pain, Cabal. You just have too many things that target low attack minions already. I don't expect this to see much play at all, so I'm just going to move on. Shifting Shade, yeah, Death Rattle. Copy a card from your opponent's deck, add it to your hand. I mean, you can compare it to Polluted Hoarder, basically. It's not as good because it's worse to draw a card from your opponent's deck than it is to draw a card from your own deck. But it does have 1 extra health, which is a very big deal. I don't think it's quite enough to make the card good. I think I would rather play this 3/6 for 4 because, you know, the Hooded Acolyte, because it just has better stats up front. But, if the metagame becomes more grindy, you want another card advantage engine, this card can be playable. All right, Darkshire Alchemist, Battlecry, restore 5 health. I'm tired and my voice hurts, so I'm kind of bricking right now, but I'm going to assume that this lets you target your own minions to heal them, and it doesn't just heal you for 5. Yeah, it would say 5 health to your hero or something. Yeah. And anyway, fact that you can heal your dudes, and you're only paying 1 more mana than a heal bot, it's not healing for as much, but still, like, healing your own dudes with this is awesome, if it can do that. Anyway, solid card, great tool for Priest. There weren't that many Priests that used Healbot to begin with, though, because the class had so many other ways to heal itself already. Healbot was more of a tool for decks like Warlock that needed the healing. So the point is, this might still not see play because you have so many other ways to heal yourself that are more mana efficient. But it's not an unplayable card by any means. It's costed aggressively. It's strong. There will be metagames where this rotates in. All right, Power Word Tentacles. People are going to compare this to Velen's Chosen. Velen's Chosen is busted. All buffs are going to look weak compared to Velen's Chosen. So Power Word Tentacles, probably not going to see play. I think it's too inefficient. I'd rather play like a Pit Fighter or a Harrison Jones or Holy Nova. This isn't going to make the cut. Moving on, Twilight Darkmender. If your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack, restore 10 health to your hero. Damn. That's a lot of health. I mean, that's a really, really big heal bot. And the stats are way better. I mean, this is the kind of card that will reward you for playing Cthulhu for sure. That, along with Hooded Acolyte, might be enough to make Cthulhu the finisher of choice in a Priest deck, for all we know. It might see play, but those Cthulhu decks are going to take a lot of practice, building and playing with. And the Beckoner does actually make the cut in the Priest Cthulhu deck, the 2-mana 2/3 Cthulhu card that you get for free, because Priest has no 2-drops. So in Priest, you actually end up playing that. Priest, probably one of the better classes to play Cthulhu in. Not quite as good as Druid, but still good. And moving on to Herald Volage. This card, I don't think it'll be good in Standard. There's so many good 6-mana cards for Priest that you can't afford to play one that's bad when you're behind, which this guy is. He's not good if you're behind. But in Wild, he might be really good because you can play a bunch of cheap little Death Rattle dudes like Haunted Creeper and Nerubian Egg. You know how many times I reference those cards? Like, that's how broken they are. They combo with everything. Anyway, he's good with Death Rattle minions, things that are sticky. You want to be ahead on the board. You want to be playing a deck that looks like the Undertaker Priest decks back in the day, basically. Without Undertaker, because he's not that good anymore. But yeah, point is, I don't think he's quite going to make the cut, but it's a very fun card. I love the design. Let's move on. So Druid, Forbidden Ancient. They fucking snuck this guy in somehow. I think this was like in the last batch of spoilers. This card is nuts. Okay, look, I might be completely wrong about this, and maybe you only want to play minions that are good at their exact cost, but if it's hard to have a perfect curve in Standard, which it might be, the fact this fills in the curve for you is sick. You never hero power turn 2 again. You play a 2-mana 2/2, which sounds terrible, but against aggro, that's fine. It's better than hero powering. You're putting something on the table. Just having, like, a flexible use of mana. This is the exact thought experiment minion I was thinking of, where, it costs a variable amount of mana. Works with Innervate. Like, it's just, not that that's that good of synergy, but, it's a thing. It's good with Ramp. Like, I think Forbidden Ancient is kind of a sleeper and way better than it looks, but, I mean, I'm sure they tested this and it's not that broken. The Standard decks right now kind of use all their mana every game anyway because the curves are so good. We have so many options for cards. So maybe that'll be the case again where everybody's curve is good and you don't really need a flex slot, like a variable cost card. But you know what? I still think it's pretty strong. I don't know. In Arena, it's disgusting. But in Constructed, maybe it's not good enough, but this is way, way better than it looks, I think. I wouldn't be surprised if it saw no play at all. And if it sees a ton of play, then I take all credit for always knowing it's great, basically. That's like a cop-out answer, but it is what it is. Anyway, Mark of Charge. This is the kind of card Beast Druid wants, right? If you want Beast Druid to be a thing, make cards like this. Is Beast Druid good enough? We'll see. You really have to put all the pieces together, play it, see what the metagame's like, see if the other Druid decks are strictly better. Like, is Beast Druid as good as Cthulhu Druid? I don't know. Is Beast Druid as good as Aggro Druid? It might be the case where it's like the third best Druid deck, and even though it's good on its own, people just would rather play the better Druid deck. Point is, I don't know how the Druid decks stack up, but this card's strong, and this is the kind of thing that there needs to be more of to make Beast Druid a strong contender. Addled Grizzly, after you summon a minion, give it 1/1. I think it's just too weak, to be honest. You have to trigger it twice in order to even make the stats passable to begin with. Just not going to be good enough, you know. With summoning a minion, does that work with like tokens and stuff? I'm not sure. If this works with like Murloc Tidehunter type cards, maybe that could be a tool for token decks, but I just don't think it's that strong, to be honest. Maybe in token decks and Wild, this could be a big hit, though. I don't know. Frail Rage, pretty flexible. Yeah, solid removal, gain 8 armor. Like, this is the card that you really want to choose both, because the two choices are so good together, because you don't want to eat the damage on a big minion that you're hitting. So anyway, it is strong. It's flexible. I would not be surprised if this saw a lot of play. Mostly you have to look at it as Shadow Bolt with a drawback, but it does have that gain 8 armor, and that is just so powerful. I expect this to see play. That is a powerful choice card, and it's a very difficult choice every time, which is cool. Moving on to Fandral Staghelm, is that how I pronounce it? Cool card. I love the effect. Is it good enough for Druid? Probably. It depends on how many choose cards you're going to end up playing. I think you're going to play a lot. Yeah, it just has like a strong effect, a good on-curve dude. Has immediate impact if you play him later in the game. He's a fantastic minion. I expect to see this guy a lot. The choose cards for Druid you're playing already anyway. He's not making you play bad cards to be good and powerful. So, yeah, I think Fandral is very strong. You'll see a lot of play. Druid just got a damn solid minion. That's all it is. Anyway, Claxy Amber Weaver. Look at this card. If your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack, gain 5 health. This is insane. This is insane. It's a 4-mana 4/10, but it's only a 4-mana 4/10 if you play it like later in the game. If you play it on curve, it's not going to have the extra health, but it's still Chillwind Yeti. Fantastic minion. This is one of the reasons Cthulhu Druid, I think, is going to be the best class for Cthulhu. And, yeah, just really strong card. I don't think you'd play it outside of a Cthulhu deck, obviously, because then it's just Yeti with better artwork. But anyway, cool card. Fantastic. This is why Cthulhu Druid will be a thing. I like it. Mire Keeper. Love the flexibility. Again, much like the other choice card, the other 3-mana choice card, there's a big difference between these two choices. When you pick one, you lose out on a lot. You don't want to play a 4-mana 3/3, but you also don't want to miss out on ramp by playing it for stats. So the choice here is going to be a very interesting one. It's going to depend on the texture of your hand, how your deck is built. Some Druid decks might not even want to play Mire Keeper, as ridiculous as that sounds. In the faster ones, you might just rather play like minions that have pure stats. But maybe this guy's pure stats are good enough. I don't even know how good a 3/3 plus 2/2 is on turn 4. Never been a minion like that before. Anyway, it's strong. This card will see a ton of play. Expect to see a lot moving forward. On to the next one. Dark Arakoa. 6-mana 5/7 taunt. This is a fantastic defensive minion. It's exactly what Cthulhu decks needed. This is the other reason Cthulhu Druid's going to be a thing. The only thing is, Druid still has Savage Roar, and they still have Leroy, so aggressive Druid decks are still really strong as well. Druid is just a really good class overall. It's going to have a lot of builds. I'm looking forward to streaming some Cthulhu Druid. It might be the first deck I stream, because I want to show people what to do with this Cthulhu card that they got for free. But yeah, I expect Dark Arakoa to be a core part of those decks, very obviously, and this is 50% of the reason that Cthulhu Druid is the best Cthulhu deck, most likely. Moving on to Wisp of the Old Gods. Maybe they use their AoE on your other tokens first, and then you can... This card's better than it looks, all right? I want to say it's unplayable and move on to kind of shorten up the review, but to be fair, if you're playing a pure token deck, if you have a bunch of tokens in play and you get to 7 mana, this card kills them. It's Bloodlust. If you If you're playing a token deck and they killed all your stuff, this gives you all your stuff back. They're only going to have so many AoE spells, and they probably would have used one up to this point to kill haunted creepers or whatever like minions you're playing, in Wild. But basically, in both scenarios, this card is applicable. Like, it either fills your board and makes your Savage Roars insane all of a sudden and forces them to have the AoE or lose, or it buffs all your dudes and just kills them. Like, in both cases, this is way better than it looks. But people look at it and they see Dark Whispers and they're just like, oh, it's garbage. And you know what? It probably is garbage, but if Token Druid's a thing, this card's a lot scarier than it looks. Moving on to N'Zoth's first mate. Equip a 1/3 Rusty Hook. I love cards like this so much. This is a fantastic pirate. This is the kind of stuff we need. Good for Aggro Warrior, I think. These are the kinds of pirates I love being printed. I'm going to play this in Hobgoblin Warrior deck and Wild maybe. Honestly, 1-mana cards are just broken. I overvalue them, if anything, but I think it's hard to overvalue them. When they do something, and this card does a lot, they're just so strong, man. You can't justify spending 2 mana to hero power down a card that they committed 1 mana to playing, and they still are left with a weapon. Like, there's no clean way to trade with this card. It's just damn good. I think this card's really, really strong. It will see play somewhere. And I don't know why people are not like talking about this more. 1-mana cards are nuts. It doesn't matter. It does matter what they do, but 1 mana is such a big deal. 0 mana is an even bigger deal. But the point is, just by virtue of being this cheap and having almost any kind of effect, you're breaking some rules of the game. It lets you kind of get half a turn up on the pacing of a game, and that's going to matter a lot in faster formats. Maybe even in Standard. Alright, losing my voice. It hurts every time. Moving on to Blood to Ichor. Deal 1 damage to minion if it survives. Summon a 2/2 slime. I mean, it's an enrage enabler, but you're only going to want to use this later in the game to trigger, your enrage guys or your patron. And at that stage, the 2/2 minion is a lot less effective. So you're basically playing like Elven Archer, but you're getting one extra, a little bit of extra stats. I don't think that's enough reason. I don't think it's quite good enough to make or be worth the deck slot basically over other things. But it does have synergy. It's interesting. Maybe in a low curve Blood Warrior deck that would actually be pretty sick. That might really be a thing. No joke. Moving on, Ravaging Ghoul. Deal 1 damage to all their minions. If you're ahead, this card's good in Warrior. If you're behind, this card's even better in Warrior. It's just so flexible. You can use it not just with your patrons, but purely as trading. If you're playing a fair Warrior deck that's trading into stuff, it lets your little dudes trade up. It's just a good card, straight up. They took a 3-mana 3/3. They gave you a free great card, Whirlwind, right on top of it. And it doesn't even shoot your own 3/3, so great card. This will see play somewhere, if not in almost every Warrior deck. Blood Warrior is way better than it looks. These kinds of cards can build archetypes all on their own, much like Echo of Medivh. Much stronger than it looks. I expect to see a lot of Blood Warrior. Well, I don't expect to see a lot of Blood Warrior, but it'll be a fun deck to build around. And this might be something that comes kind of out of left field, like Patron, and does pretty well that people don't expect. Putting a bunch of cards into your hand is nuts. And quite frankly, between this and Battle Rage, that's 4 draw effects that can just draw your deck basically. So I think this has a lot of potential, and people aren't giving this enough credit. Moving on to Bloodsail Cultist. If you control Pirate, give your weapon +1/+1. Another Spider Tank worth of stats. This is actually a great card for the Pirate Tribe, but we need a lot more aggressively costed Pirates in order for that to be a real deck. This is not quite enough. We need more cards like Ship's Cannon as well. So, great card for Pirate decks, but I don't think Pirate decks are quite there yet, so it won't see as much play as it could in the future. Moving on to Bloodhoof Brave. 4-mana 2/6 taunt and rage +3 attack. This is sick. This is better than Senjin. This is the kind of dude we needed if they're trying to push Taunt Warrior. Fantastic defensive 4-drop. We don't have Despite anymore, so we needed a good one. I expect to see a good amount of this guy. It does die to Stampeding Kodo, so if this is being played, hopefully you don't run into that. But this is just a good card. I expect this to see a good amount of play. Very awkward to deal with. Tentacles for arms, some people are talking about it being used as a finisher in fatigue decks, but quite frankly, you have Elise. The whole point of Elise is it only takes one deck slot to end games. So that's why you play it. So this won't see play. There is an OTK with it too, with weapon cost reduction and stuff, but ignore that. It's not important. It's not good. Anyway, Malkarok, Battlecry, equip a random weapon. I'm going to lose to this if somebody plays it against me. They're going to get Gorehowl, and I'm going to take 14 because I got it's not Blingtron. Anyway, Malkarok. I think the spread on weapons you get is just too random. You can get Rusty Hooks. You can get Lights Justices. Sure, you can get, like, incredible weapons, too, but actually, I don't even know if you can get Rusty Hook. Maybe not. Anyway, point is, you can get too many bad weapons. If you get Cursed Blade, you lose. Overall, I think the stats just aren't quite good enough to warrant the risk, and the card's just not quite good enough overall. It's interesting, though. Ancient Shield Bearer, if your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack, gain 10 armor. I think most armor cards are broken because if you stack enough of it, you can just play a pile of removal and Justicar and just beat everything. This card, however, only works in Cthulhu decks, and the thing about Cthulhu decks is that they need to play a lot of minions. So if you're curving out with a lot of these random mid-range dudes, like the River Crocodile Cthulhu card and Twilight Elder, like you don't have room for like shield blocks and piles of removal. Those decks that curve out with minions that buff your Cthulhu, they care more about having control of the board. They don't care about preserving their life total and killing stuff. So what I'm saying by that is armor is a lot less valuable for a deck that has Cthulhu in it than it is for like a removal-based warrior deck, because the two are different. You're not going to have room for every removal spell in the game plus Cthulhu cards. So anyway, Cthulhu dudes plus board control dudes are a good combination, and armor cards plus removal is a good combination. But this card is like armor plus Cthulhu dudes. It's not a good fit, really. I think it's just too awkward. All right, moving on. Forbidden Ritual. Spend all your mana, summon that many 1/1 tentacles. It's actually interesting. It's like Implosion, but I can get more than 2 1/1s out of it. It's like, I guess you can compare it to the other variable cost cards. I value flexibility like this a lot, personally, but this is the kind of thing that just dies to one, AoE effect. But you did only commit one card to making that board with it. So Forbidden Ritual might be a lot better than it looks, and maybe this is like a sleeper hit for Zoo, where you're just, I don't know, running it out to fill in your curve and like top decking it late, making 7 dudes. But overall, like I don't want to say it probably won't see play. The forbidden cards are just honestly the hardest things I've ever seen in Hearthstone to evaluate, because every instinct I've had from like 8 years of Magic is telling me the amount of flexibility they give you makes them like really, really good. But then I read them and it's like, no matter how much mana you're using for, yes, it's underwhelming. I don't know if the choice matters as much in Hearthstone as it does in Magic, because in Hearthstone you just kind of play the most expensive thing in your hand most of the time. But the choice in this case might still be strong enough that this is a very good card and much better than people give it credit for. But it also might be unplayable. I honestly, I'm gonna take a pass on this one, but it's better than people think. I'll say that. Possessed Villager, it's great. I thought they'd never make a good 1-mana Warlock card again for Zoo. They did. I'm excited to play it. You're going to see a lot of this guy. Just another Argent Squire type of option. I'm happy it's in the game. Darkshire Librarian, Battlecry, discard a random card. Death Rattle, draw a card. Very cool, but I'm not seeing how to take advantage of this, right? Like if you empty your hand, I guess, then it's like Bloodfin Raptor with Death Rattle, draw a card. You build your own loot hoarder, but you have to empty your hand first. I guess it's a good top deck in a deck that plays Soulfire and this card and Doomguard. Draw it off the top, it's like pretty good. Overall, I don't expect it to see too much play though, but maybe it will. I hope they make more cards like Fist of Jiraxis that reward you for discarding your own stuff. Moving on, Renounce Darkness. Replace your Hero Power and Warlock cards with another classes. Those cards cost 1 less. It's a tough card to get value out of. I think it's better in decks that have a lot of cards in hand. I don't really like it in Zoo, because the more cards you have in hand, the more cards you have that are affected by that cost reduction. And if you have more cards that are affected by the cost reduction, then it's kind of like you paid 2 mana for an Emperor Thorson trigger, kind of. Overall, it's a ridiculous card. I don't think it's competitive. I can't really think of a way to take a lot of advantage of it. But maybe you play this in like Reno or some kind of control deck with a lot of, I don't know. It's better the more cards you have in hand, but I don't think it's playable. It's just a weird, wacky card. It's cool it's in the game. It'll be fun to play with and lose to inevitably. Moving on, Spreading Madness. Deal 9 damage, split randomly. Very good for the like suicide Warlock decks. I used to play some Zoo decks with Molten Giant way back in the day in closed beta. But this kind of card is very much for like the burn-oriented Warlock decks. If you have 0 minions and your opponent has 1 minion, on average, this is a 3-mana Hellfire, which is solid. If your opponent is playing a token deck and they have several minions, also very good for you because they have way more targets than you do. If your opponent is very low on life and you're just trying to burn them out, that's also very good for you. Just like every other card in Hearthstone, this combos with Nerubian Egg, so maybe in Wild it sees play. All in all, it'll be played in very, very aggressive Warlock decks, if anything, and I'm not sure that those will exist in Standard, but maybe they do. It'll be fun to try them out. I'm not sure if it's good enough. We'll see. Darkshroud Councilman, after you summon a minion, gain 1 attack. I mean, I don't want to write this card off right away, but I think this is just too weak. Maybe you can do some crazy stuff if you just go off with tokens and all of that. Like, I'm still struggling to understand the whole summon thing. Summon is how Knife Juggler is worded, and Knife Juggler works well with, like, Haunted Creeper. So I think after you summon a minion. So I think this works with tokens. So if you play this, run in a Haunted Creeper, trade with something, that's actually like pretty good. I don't know. It can be good. It's just like off the top it's weak. I don't know. I don't think it's quite good enough to make the cut right now. There's just too many other options. You have the Panda that deals 2 damage. You have Imp Gang Boss. Those are better. Moving on. Usher of Souls, whenever a friendly minion dies, give your Cthulhu +1/+1. So Pit Fighter stats and it buffs your Cthulhu. It's cool that they're doing more of this theme of trade your own minions. I actually really like that. The Forbidden Ritual works with it. Possessed Villager works with it. Darkshire Councilman works with it. It's actually very cool. It'll be like a Cult Master type of theme. I like that direction with Warlock. This particular guy is not enough to make Cthulhu Warlock a thing, I think. Maybe you play just like 1 Cthulhu and 2 of these Ushers and just hope. But no, I mean, Warlock will be more like a token deck, basically. It gets rewarded for trading in. Moving on, Shogal. Everyone is really hyped about this card, but I don't really see it. I don't think it's that good. It's not good with Doom or Twisting Nether because you're 2-for-1ing yourself to get... You're like losing 2 cards, losing half your life. Just to wipe the board, and then they still get to play stuff first. It's not that good with Shadow Flame, because it's like 7-mana Twisting Nether, basically, where you take 4. It is good with Siphon Soul, but it's only like okay with Siphon Soul. It's not even as much value as like Fire Elemental. I think like in every instance of Cho'Gall, it's just not quite good enough, you know? There'll be more spells in the future, maybe it gets better. We'll see what happens. Moving on to Doom, it says destroy all minions, draw a card for each. This might see play in Reno decks that really want a second Twisting Nether, but some Reno decks aren't even playing Twisting Nether to begin with. I think it's unlikely that this sees play, but it is a really cool, ridiculous spell. Maybe some Reno deck will blow me out with this 1 point. I don't know. We'll see. Moving on to Shaman. We just got 2 classes to go, and then we're done. So just not too many more cards. 16 more. Primal Fusion, give a minion +1/+1 for each of your totems. That is too weak, I think. You can only really use this later in the game. It's not really an early game buff that you can use to make a trade that you wouldn't be able to. I think it's going to be too tough to get value out of. If you have a million totems in play already, you should be able to capitalize on that with other cards that are better on their own, like Flame Tongue Totem. So overall, Primal Fusion, pretty bad. Evolve looks nutty. I don't know. A lot of people are hyped for this card, and rightfully so, I think. I mean, it's like a 1-mana card that rewards you pretty heavily for having every minion in play. Like, for every extra minion you have, it gets stronger. 1-mana cards, like I said, are stupid strong. Spells are stupidly strong. This has to be good. Rewards you for swarming the board. I think Evolve is strong, and I expect it to see play in a lot of different Shaman decks, but Shaman at this point has so many powerful cards available to it that I don't even know what build you want, because if you're playing like the full-on Tunnel Trog double Doomhammer list, you don't want to play Evolve, even though it's a great card. If you're playing the more mid-rangey, slow type of Shaman list, then you do want to play Evolve. The thing is, Tunnel Trog is one of the best 1-drops in the game. 1-drops are some of the most powerful things you can do in the game, and Doomhammer is the most powerful card in the game that did not get nerfed. So probably just the Doomhammer might just be like the strongest card right now, besides maybe like Innervate. So what I'm saying that why Doomhammer matters is because if the double Doomhammer deck is just the best Shaman deck, we might not see that much Evolve. But, the mid-range Shaman deck got a lot of tools too. I fully expect it to be a deck that's played. This has synergy with so much stuff. This will be good. Moving on, Eternal Sentinel. Super interesting card. There's finally a second like Lava Shock type of effect. So you can finally build a deck with that's more heavy on Overload. This isn't as good as Lava Shock because you can't really make use of this Bloodfin Raptor in like a Malagos type of combo Shaman. So it's not as flexible in the decks you put it in. You'll really only want this in like a mid-rangey Unbound Elemental Overload thing. But maybe there's a hybrid mid-range double Doomhammer type of thing, and then you play it in that. I could definitely see that. It's interesting to have another one of these effects in the game, though, and this is definitely constructed playable. Stormcrack I don't think is that good, just too inefficient. Compared to Shadowbolt, maybe you won't really want the one more Overload card. We are losing Crackle, thank God. Maybe this will see play, but I just don't really see this card as being that strong. Stormcrack is pretty underwhelming. Would rather play minions most of the time. Flame Wreath Faceless, pretty underrated, honestly. More people should be talking about this guy. Big Game Hunter's nerfed. What do you do about a 4-mana 7/7? Shredder used to trade into this. Shredder's gone. What are you going to do to this? It's actually kind of ridiculous the things you can accomplish in a mid-range, overloady Shaman list now. And Flame Wreath Faceless just feels super, super powerful. In Standard, at least. In Wild, it's less strong, I think. But, if this card picks up in popularity, that's the kind of stuff that makes a card like Hunter's Mark see a resurgence. So, we'll see. Overall, it could just be terrible. There are plenty of other 4-drop options, but it's a card that might just be very hard to answer well, and a big reason of why Shaman's successful. Master Revolution, super strong for all the same reasons I stated before about the Evolve card. This one doesn't reward you for flooding the board, but just for being a good on-curve dude. Very strong effect. I like it. It will see play somewhere. Let's see what happens with it. Hammer of Twilight. I don't think it's will see play at all. Not only does it compete with Doomhammer, but the 4/2 minion that you get is just not that strong that late in the game. You're getting it turn 6. It's going to be turn 7 so it can attack. It's too easy to trade into. It's just not that good. Moving on, Halazeel the Ascended is actually one of the coolest cards. I really like this kind of design. For the same reason I like Ragnaros. I just like these finishers that are good in control, We didn't really get that many new removal spells. We got Stormcrack, I guess, that works with this guy, but I'm not even sure if that card's good enough to see play. Maybe it is. It's on the edge. Anyway, Halazeel is really cool. I don't think Halazeel, because you can only play one of him, he's not quite enough to make me feel like Control Shaman is better than double Doomhammer Shaman, because Doomhammer is so stupid. But he goes part of the way, I want to play this guy in my mid-range deck as a finisher, basically. I want this guy to lock my opponent out of the game and steal some games from me. So overall, I look forward to playing it. It's going to be fun. I love the design. It's a very cool card. And Thing from Below, people are going to remember Evolve, and it's hard for me to evaluate Evolve. But the point is, Thing from Below, in my opinion, is probably the best Shaman card in this set. And Shaman looks like it'll be either the best or one of the top 2 best classes in this expansion. So Thing from Below is really strong. It's my personal favorite Shaman card from the set. Later in the game, it's just going to flip the board for you. It synergizes with all your Evolve cards because it's expensive. It's just so good. It does everything you want to do. It doesn't make sense in the aggro Shaman lists, but it's just a good, strong card for all the mid-range lists. And I think Thing from Below is, the strongest Shaman card in the expansion, in my opinion. Maybe it'll end up being Evolve, but I think Thing from Below. I don't think there will be an Evolve deck without Thing from Below. Anyway, Bladed Cultist. It's an interesting. Moving on to Rogue anyway. Bladed Cultist is a very interesting type of... Well, I guess I should talk about Cthulhu for a second. I don't think there's going to be Cthulhu Shaman. I'll just say that. Not really a reason to do Cthulhu Shaman over other classes. All right, on to Rogue. Bladed Cultist. Combo, gain 1/1. If you're playing a very low-curve Rogue deck, you're going to want some card draw to compensate for that. And Rogue does have a bit more of it. It's going to be very much a deck that just fights for board control now. We'll see if it can have the card draw to keep up with, playing a bunch of one-mana cards. But all in all, this is definitely interesting. It's a strong type of zombie chow effect that you can't do turn 1. And I'm excited to see what happens to it. Like it might see a lot of play, but it might just see none at all. It's a very tough one to evaluate. And it's mostly going to depend on whether that archetype of Rogue is a real thing where you're playing this low curve like tempo deck. Moving on to Journey from Below, discover a Death Rattle card. This card enables your combos. It helps you get a playable card for your Unearthed Raptor, which will be the strongest 3-mana card in the game, in Standard at least. So, this is the potential to be played very heavily because Raptor Rogue will almost inevitably be the build of Rogue because of the cards they gave us. So, yeah, Journey from Below might see a lot of play. We'll see. Gives you something to do turn 1 anyway, which Rogue usually doesn't, and then in that case, you're not really losing anything. You know what I mean? You're not like losing a mana to play it. All right, moving on to Undercity Huckster. I love this 2-drop. I think this is a great way to do RNG in Hearthstone. It's an early game minion. It has a random effect, but it doesn't randomly affect the board and snowball out of control. So Undercity Huckster, love this design. Very cool card. It'll be core. Expect to copy this with Raptor a lot. And great card. I expect to see a lot of play. Shadow Strike, deal 5 damage to undamaged character. There's a big difference between 4 and 5, but Shadow Bolt is not a great card. But Rogue is a deck that would play Shadow Bolt because it has the all-removal Malagos Emperor Gadgetzin deck. And in that deck, Shadow Strike fits pretty damn well. So I would expect Shadow Strike to see some amount of play, at least in the spell-based Rogue decks. Zeril, the Poisoned Mind, is a fantastic 4-drop. He seems a little bit underwhelming with the stats, but the spare parts really are great. I think he's going to open the door for some really cool plays. It's going to be a fun card to play with. I think I enjoy the design on it a lot, and really look forward to copying this with Raptor if possible. So, just a solid 4-drop. I think there's always going to be room for him. You know, I don't think you're going to find 29 cards that are better than Zeril. Or 30 cards that are better. So he'll always squeeze in and just be solid, I think. South Sea Squid Face is a tough one to evaluate, but if you do have the weapon, this is a very good 4-drop. The thing about 4-drops in Rogue is you already had Violet Teacher as a really good option. So we'll see if this is better, but there's a big difference between 5 health and 4 health. It is a strong pirate, though. The Deadly Poison effect is so good for Rogue. You can't Blade Flurry anymore, which really sucks because of the nerfs. But this card is passable. It's playable stats. We'll see what happens with it. Moving on to Shadowcaster. We just got 3 cards left to go, guys. Shadowcaster's Battlecry. Choose a friendly minion. Add a 1/1 copy to your hand that costs 1. So it's only good if you're ahead on board. And it is good with Death Rattle minions because you're likely to have something stick in play. The thing is, none of the new Death Rattle minions, in Rogue at least, seem to stick on the board. They have Death Rattle effects, but it doesn't replace them with another minion, like Haunted Creeper and Rubian Egg. So because of that, when you lose your Undercity Huckster, or you lose your South Sea Squid Face, or you lose Zeril, they're not being replaced with another minion that you can Shadowcaster. So I definitely see a scenario where this is just a win more card, and if you fall behind on board, he's just kind of like a 5-mana 4/4 that's dead. So because it is that kind of win more card, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see too much of this card. But I'll experiment with it a little bit, maybe play 1. It might be better than it looks to me, but yeah. I'm not super convinced yet. We'll see. Moving on to Thistle Tea. I mean, it's another sprint. It doesn't draw you into multiple card combos. It just gets you a lot of one thing. Rogue did not need another big expensive spell that drew a bunch of cards, so I don't expect this to see too much playing constructed. Anyway, moving on to our very last card, Blade of Cthulhu, Battlecry. Destroy a minion, add its attack and health to Cthulhu's. 9 mana, Assassinate is not quite good enough, even if there's a 4/4 attached. And if you don't immediately follow this up with Cthulhu, you're going to have a bad time. So overall, I think as far as Rogue goes, we're going to not see too much Cthulhu, but we will see a lot of the lower curve, tempo, raptor, like board control oriented Rogue deck. And that's it, man. That's my Whispers of the Old Gods set review. I tried to speed it up towards the end there a bit. Sorry for making these all long. That was one take. I'm exhausted. My throat hurts. Go to tempostrum.com. Buy some good-looking, affordable clothing. And don't forget to save 10% using code TEMPO. And, yeah, thanks for watching, guys. It's been fun. Remember to check out that RNG video that I just did right before this. That was a really good video, I think. So at least I felt like it was a message I needed to get out there in a different platform than just my stream. So anyway, till next time, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Infamously, Knife Juggler, right? This is a card I get very upset about all the time on stream. One of my least favorite cards in the game. Definitely my least favorite minion, at least. And I was pretty upset when they announced that they're nerfing it very slightly to just having one less attack here.